Hi, John.
Hey Nick, how are you today?
I'm fine. It's still fine weather. It's really heating up here in Wales. You might still call it mildly chilly, but for us, this is a heat wave now.
It is funny because it's been I went out just to walk the dog before I sat down here. He won't come into the shed, it's too hot. And uh Guido um was quite comfortable. And he's a Frenchman, he's very sensitive to heat. And I thought it's probably hotter in Wales than it is here today. Um Certainly doesn't seem hot to us compared to what it is in Wales.
No, I mean I have. So for Addie, my dog, I have a cool coat, which is sort of a chamois leather thing that you put in water and it slowly releases water to keep the dog cool, and it gets maybe 1 or 2 days use a year. But Addie's a proper hot dog. She's a very thin lurcher, and she loves the heat, hates the cold and the rain. It's the wrong country for her, but she loves the heat. So what are we doing? Why am I here in my beautiful, if slightly warm pond that's now little more than a dry puddle, and you in that sweltering shed, John?
um we are you're at the lake and I am in the shed because of Rowling's metaphor about how she writes, which really should be taken as how to read her work. That metaphor is that she uh, takes her inspiration from her unconscious mind, from the water in the lake. And those are her core beliefs. Those are her crises in her life, which are unresolved. Her unconscious is still wrestling with. And it kicks up the story stuff, this molten glass. And she takes it to her shed, which is, with what in the UK they call a garage. And uh, there she works her intentional artistry and turns it into something much more than just a Mary Sue story. And telling for today's material, she says that in that 2019 interview, she said that sometimes she reads other writers and she thinks, wow, that's way too much shed. I think today we're going to see that's way too much lake. uh, but there is a lot of shed in Casual Vacancy as well. And today we're going to talk about the lake and the shed. We're trying to just do one point, and I think both of us are really going to struggle with this one.
Yeah, I'm gonna
And
try and
even if you just do one point, it's like it's really at the heart of what she does.
yeah.
I can't wait. But you're the lake guy. Tell me
Yes.
tell me the story of Casual Vacancy.
Okay, so
It's
where are we? So we had Deathly Hallows was published to great fanfare in 2007, the biggest publishing event in history. And then Rowling went on a 5-year holiday, and she basically did nothing between 2007 and 2012.
You don't mean that.
No, of course I don't. So we now
Okay.
know. So we now know she was writing, or at least maybe a bit contentious. I'm going to say she was updating Casual Vacancy. She had the idea for local government on a plane flight when she was going out to the States. But I think that was literally the hook she had the idea for. I think the story and the characters for Casual Vacancy had been bubbling around in her lake for some time.
Do you think this is the private joke, the novel that she was writing before?
It could well be.
I think so. I'll
It's
talk about that, but I really think that
it's
this
got I think it's got the bones of an old established story. We know that she had pretty much completed Cuckoo's Calling by this time, but of course that was done completely secretly and anonymously because that's published next year. And don't forget, she's got to send this around lots of different publishers trying to find somebody that will publish it.
So in
We know,
2012, you think she's got that done, but she
I think
said
so.
that Silkworm actually came first. So
Yeah, but she's got that 5-year holiday, so maybe she's playing around with plots and sequences in all through that time. But certainly by the time Casual Vacancy is published, she's got a manuscript because that manuscript will already have started going around publishers. Ichabod, we think she pretty much abandoned that prior to the publication of Deathly Hallows, although we were still waiting for this political fairy tale because she never announced that she abandoned it until sometime after Casual Vacancy, when she mentions that she uses it for a dress at a fancy dress party.
I mean, this project that we're doing is for her 60th birthday.
Yeah.
The Conrecki, and that it's it's her second birth now. But at her 50th birthday, doesn't she wear the Ichabod as a dress?
Yes, she does. Yeah.
Okay,
So
that's
it's
2015, obviously.
yeah. So that's it's a fancy dress party, and she's held quite a few fancy dress parties, but this is one of the few ones that we've got some photographs. Usually things like cameras and mobile phones are strictly not allowed at the Killy house for parties. But this particular fancy dress party, the theme was personal nightmares. Doesn't sound a very engaging theme for a party. But Rowling went as a lost manuscript. Her personal nightmare was a lost manuscript. And this lost manuscript was taken from pages of her rough draft of the Ichabod. We've got a photograph of her with her astrological friends, Starsky and Cox, which is their stage names. Much later, we had a photograph with Robbie Coltrane. So at the point it was announced that Robbie had died, then she released a photograph of her in this dress next to Robbie Coltrane. But yeah, we think it was either abandoned or at least progress was no longer being made prior to Deathly Hallows. But she had already started work on Christmas Pig at that point. So we've got, in this 5-year holiday, we have Christmas Pig, Casual Vacancy, some mix of Cuckoo's Calling and Silkworm, and to top it all off, she's got Warner Brothers executives jetting across the world from New York to her Edinburgh townhouse, trying to persuade her to sign over, well, she's already signed over the rights to it, but to constructively bless the film franchise for Fantastic Beasts. So actually, although not a lot is coming out in the bookshops, an awful lot is happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, I'd say, and when we talk about Cuckoo's Calling, I'm going to go on at great length about how she clearly had at least the first 7 novels locked down.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much that happens in Cuckoo's Calling that is reflected in Running Grave. That 5-year gap, she has laid out the first 7 books as a solid ring. Now, in this 3 adventure episode, we don't know what the next 3 years structure is going to be, or the 3-book structure is going to be. But boy, those first 7 books they're tight. So
I think all the structure fans, which is most people at Hogwarts Professor, are really excited about what we're going to find in the final 3 in this series, how it's going to link into the structure.
Anyway, I'm sorry. So Rowling's seemingly very happy, but she's we know from Christmas Pig, there's one of the personal crises that she had to go through was the mixed marriage, the children and the new father coming in and such. But
so I don't know that I would put that down as a crisis. I think that there's bound to be challenges. But other than that textual evidence, we've got no evidence at all. Actually, one of the great success stories that J.K. Rowling has engineered is the absolute secrecy surrounding her children.
Yeah, and nothing but applause for that effort and her success in it. But I do think that we do have to call it as a crisis, because what else inspires Christmas Pig other than that difficulty in her life? Not that it wasn't well met and resolved, but there it was.
Yeah.
And as you said, that happened somewhere, that she writes that somewhere in the gap.
Yes.
Okay. Whew.
So
now we're on.
So now we have Casual Vacancy. Now there was a furious bidding war for the rights to for the rights to publish Casual Vacancy. You have an author that basically has a license to print money. They can't build lorries quick enough to get books to bookshops on release day, releases nothing for 5 years and says, hey guys, I've got a book, who wants it? I think
You changed agents too, right?
Yeah, she changed agents fairly acrimoniously, but the root of all this, I still believe, goes back to that UK publicity tour for Goblet of Fire. At some point, a Warner Brothers executive gets poached or is encouraged to move um, from Warner Brothers to Little Agency, and that was Neil Blair. And I suspect that was Rowling Inc., probably in cahoots with Neil, saying, look, this agency is too small. They don't handle global stars, which is what reluctantly I'm becoming. We need someone here who can manage global brands. So he comes in to work at this little mom and pop agency. I think fairly shortly, Rowling and Blair realized that this wasn't going to work, trying to make this little agency into a global brand manager. They needed a separate agency. Essentially, it was going to be a custom agency for Rowling. They now take on other authors as well, but by far their largest business is Rowling, and that's
Blair on
unfortunate.
his website, I checked this the other day, his
Yeah,
only author is Rowling Galbraith.
yeah. But the Christopher Little or Neil Blair?
Neil
Neil,
Blair, the
yeah,
agency represents other authors, but Blair
yes.
himself only represents.
Oh, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And he, it's not just him. So he has a small team as well that are just there to manage, merchandising deals and cover artwork and all of the things you need to manage when you've got a global brand. He's also part of an organization with Warner Brothers that combine to make sure that the strategy for both the films and the literature has a common direction. So he also has a seat at that table. Now, I feel bad for Christopher Little because he took a punt on this small author, and I think certainly when the news hit him that his big superstar and probably his chief assistant at his own agency was going to desert him, I think he was understandably upset. However, he gained riches beyond his wildest dreams without needing an awful lot of investment. I think if he had realized that you can't just make these millions of pounds and treat it like any other author just taking your 15%. You have to invest that back into, how do I protect the author? How do I protect their property? How do I protect the brand? I think if he'd realized that, either he would have said, look, we need to cut a deal, but you need to go somewhere else, or he would have transformed what I'm sure was a very comfortable agency for him into this global brand manager, which is what Rowling needed.
As you said, it wasn't pretty, but
No,
but
uh,
necessary.
but I think it's a similar story with Bloomsbury. So Bloomsbury didn't get the deal for Casual Vacancy. Her French publisher didn't get the deal for Casual Vacancy. Um, Scholastic didn't get the deal for Casual Vacancy. Um, so and there were quite a few upset people within the publishing industry, but this was
But yeah, but
Rowling.
it was an adult novel. It wouldn't have been a
Yes,
match for, I don't know about the
no,
French publisher, but the American and the UK publisher, that
no,
really wouldn't have been a match for their audience.
no. But I'm sure there was a bit of peak, but it was from, again, Neil Blair um, flexing his muscles and also rolling the powerhouse. It was a show me the money moment. So she'd got Lumos off the ground now. Here's my book. Show me the money. The launch. Several journalists have talked about how crazy the launch was. No advanced readers. If you were going to write an article on publication day, you had to go and read it at the Blair offices with a security guard looking over one shoulder to make sure you didn't sneak a manuscript or photographs of the manuscript out. This was so one of the journalists described Blair as Rowling's gorilla or something of that sort. But it was very, very carefully managed. A blaze of publicity, as you would expect. And I think it's fair to say fairly mixed reviews from most reviewers. It's not what anyone was expecting from J.K. Rowling. For me, it was exactly what I was expecting because it's the first book of hers that I ever read. So I think I've told this story a couple of times. I had fallen out of the habit of reading fiction. I used to read a lot as a schoolboy through my A-levels, a little bit at university, but I'd got into the habit of reading non-fiction and falling down rabbit holes. So I was far happier with an encyclopedia before things got digital, and with digital, Google was my home, and I was more than happy doing this. But I had quite a rough couple of years. So my parents died fairly close together. I was sorting out the estate for the family. There was a lot to do, and I wasn't handling it very well. And what I mean by not handling it very well, I wasn't processing what was going on with me. So, John, you joked a little bit about I was finding comfort in the misery of other people. It was there was an aspect of that, but there was also because I was reading about other people's problems that seemed so real to me on that page. It allowed me to emotionally release when I wasn't releasing for my own troubles. And I'm not ashamed to admit that almost every chapter saw me in tears. And it's now with the Cormoran Strike series, just because they publish almost every year, it's the book that I have an annual reread, just to sort of center myself back on why I love reading so much.
I want to apologize for being glib about your finding.
Oh, no.
But I reread in preparation for this conversation things that I wrote on. I had a series of like 15 threads that we had just smashed out about Casual Vacancy. Maybe the first things you read at Hogwarts Professor, right? And I'll talk about that in my part of this. But my takeaway from it was you got to ignore all the lake stuff. We didn't have the lake and shed terminology. You got to ignore all the personal stuff because this book will floor you in terms of your self-reflection about all the characters. You will recognize, in yourself, in your relationships or in your history, these things. And if you're not moved to self-reflection, then maybe you need counseling or medication because it really will, set you back. And Casual Vacancy did set me back. I mean, I'm obviously a son. I'm a husband of some 30, almost 40 years. I've got 4 daughters. I've got granddaughters. And the relationship of men and women on all of those levels.
Yeah.
And the history of boyfriend and girlfriend, that kind of thing. Whew. Every relationship in there, was just close enough to my experiences because they're relatively, generic situations that you're moved to say, wow, that's the way someone objective sees me.
Yeah.
And is that the way I want to be going forward? Or is that the way I want to recall myself? And how have I changed? And what decisions have I made? I mean, it's a very challenging book.
Yeah.
Did she need to say the word fuck 140 times? I don't know. But part of it's the grittiness of it that you get. Yeah. It's the Northrop Frye thing. You've got a spectrum here where if things have to be realistic enough that you can see yourself inside the story, and then you'll move from that realistic side of the spectrum way over to the archetypal or the mythic side of the spectrum. And there you'll get this kind of chronological experience. You'll have experience of these references. And that's, much heavier on the grit.
Yeah.
In Casual Vacancy than certainly we got in the high fantasy novels of Harry Potter. But I think we do get the delivery of because of the shed artistry, we get that stuff. But anyway, Nick, this is your book in terms of, if there's ever a book, and I hope you're writing it, about the lake elements. And we got some hint today that there is a critical biography in the works, very much in the works, consequent to stuff that you've been doing. Casual Vacancy will be the centerpiece of that critical biography. Almost all Bagford Tuthill is just so tight. Anyway, I've gone on. Here I am talking a lot about you're the late guy. I'm chattering. Excuse me.
So I don't know how many people are watching these videos in order, but I guess there's some people are going to come straight here from the introduction, and why wouldn't you? It's obviously Rowling's finest work. So you'll have heard me say that I'm going to talk to you today about the geographic parallels between Tuthill, Pagford, Bristol, Yate. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because this is the most biographically indebted work that she's got. I'm going to look at one of the key 7 crises, and I like the way we term it, or John really has coined the phrase, the 7 crises in Jo's life. It kind of implies she's got no more crises coming up, and that's got to be a great comfort to her. But one of the key things that she's struggled with in her life is what we call bad dad. So that's the poor relationship between Rowling and her father. So a little bit of biography of Peter Rowling, which is J.K. Rowling's father. So he was born in Essex in a working class family. His father, Ernest, ran a grocery store. Before that, he was a tobacco warehouseman, a stockkeeper. He had an older brother, Geoffrey. He left home to join the Royal Navy, and he was going to become an aircraft artificer, and that's sort of a superior technician mechanic within the Royal Navy that would look after aircraft on aircraft carriers. And so he gets his papers, he arrives at King's Cross Station to go up to what was then a Royal Naval Air Station in Arbroath. And there he met Anne Villant.
I'm going to interrupt, Nick. You're an engineer.
Yeah.
And you're someone acutely sensitive to UK class status.
Yes.
A grocer's son.
Yeah.
Is going to become an airplane artificer.
Yes.
Is that a class leap?
No. I think within.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's
for
fine.
Me, I'm like, what is that?
Yeah. So they would both be considered working class occupations. Certainly before you got to chief petty officer rank. I think chief petty officer you consider yourself lower middle class, but it would still be working class, but it would be skilled working class. So this really was a very challenging technical role. He must have done well. I don't know if he went to secondary modern or a grammar school. Again, there's sort of a class difference between the two, but he must have done well technically at science and mathematics based subjects, because to get in as an artificer apprentice was extremely competitive. Likewise, actually, for Anne Valant. So Anne Valant was going to the same Naval Air Station to train as a flight line mechanic, and that's doing not quite as technical a role, but still working with aircraft within the naval air stations rather than going to sea. And it was the most technically challenging role that was available to women in the Royal Navy at that time. They go up to start their apprenticeships, and fairly shortly, Anne falls pregnant. Now, at that time, you could not serve in the UK military and be pregnant, so it wasn't considered a crime as such, but you would have a no fault discharge, and that's exactly what happened to Anne. Peter, although we don't know, was almost certainly offered the chance to voluntarily terminate his apprenticeship and membership of the Royal Navy, or he would have gone on a charge. So I think that for the Peter, that could have been a chargeable offence, which would be fraternising with a fellow trainee. So both of them leave the Royal Navy. They come back to London. They get married. Now, meanwhile, Peter's older brother, Geoffrey, had gotten a job with the Rolls-Royce aero engine factory in Bristol, and seems to be doing quite well at that point, at least well enough that he can pull a few strings and get his brother, who's just been kicked out of the Navy, and his young wife an apprentice position in Rolls-Royce. But again, that's going all the way back to square one for Peter. The young family gets a small house in Yate. When I say small house, I don't think Americans can quite comprehend when a UK person says small. It's really small. So I've seen photographs of their first house in Yate. It's what we call a dormer bungalow. So it does go over 2 floors, but basically there's a pokey bedroom upstairs, and that's it. 2 years later, they moved to a slightly better house in Winterbourne. By this point, Diane has arrived. And this is
when is Jo? Jo is born in Yate?
Yeah, Jo is born in Yate. Actually, it is the cottage hospital where she was born. The building is still there, but it hasn't operated for a long time. And it's within the health district of Chipping Sodbury, which pleased when Jo was first giving interviews, pleased her no end that it had a funny name. So they moved to Winterbourne, and they moved basically into Privet Drive. So if you can imagine the film depiction of Privet Drive, this is pretty much their house, although it's terraced rather than detached, complete down to the cupboard under the stairs. So of the 3 houses that Jo grew up in, it's the one in Winterbourne has got a cupboard under the stairs. While this is going on, Peter's brother seems to be doing extremely well, because at about the point that Peter moves to Tuts Hill, he has got an extremely nice house in a seaside resort called Clevedon. Very nice property. He's earning sufficient that both of his children can go to public school. I think, working class accent or not, I think you can consider him middle class at this point. Peter's not quite there, but my suspicion is he wants to be. So he can't afford anything like a house like his brother's, but he gets this small cottage in Tuts Hill. The cottage actually was originally a school that was attached to what was called a church of convenience. So it's not a parish church as such. It's sort of a sub-church for the surrounding population. And the school attached to it was what became Church Cottage. It was old. It was in a state of disrepair. But it was a stone cottage in a lovely rural location.
Does it mean?
Sorry?
Church cottage, is it where the priest assigned to the church lived?
No, no. So because it wasn't a parish church, it didn't have an attached vicarage. So it would have had a visiting priest. So I've had great fun trying to work out who was delivering sermons at St. Luke's when Rowling was there, and absent any first party testimony, it's almost impossible to find out because it as such doesn't have an assigned priest. We know until a few years ago that seems to be a very good, very popular priest used to like to preach there because he's blogged about it, but this was long after Rowling's time. So so they're in Tuts Hill. They're in a nice rural location. Peter's doing okay, so it's enough to afford modest mortgage. It's handy for the kids because the primary school is directly opposite the school, but that's literally it in terms of facilities. So you have a church with a graveyard with a house built basically right in the middle of the churchyard. It covers sort of three sides of the boundary of the property, and then you look across the road and there's the primary school. So it's some distance, a good brisk walk outside of Tuts Hill. Beautiful scenery. You can see the Wye River, but you wouldn't call it in the middle of a community. Okay, so that's Peter Rowling. So who is Peter Rowling in the book? Well, one of my favorite interviews with Jo was published in the New Yorker shortly after the publication of Casual Vacancy, and the article was titled Muggle March, and I think at least half of my liking for that article is the name of the title. So in the article, they say one of the more interesting characters in the Casual Vacancy is Andrew, a restless teenager with an abusive, belittling father. Andrew's romantic idea that he'll go and live among the graffiti and broken windows of London, that was me, Rowling said. I thought I have to get away from this place, so all of my energies went into that. She has previously said that her father frightened her. When I asked her about him, Rowling said, I did not have an easy relationship with my father, but no one in the Casual Vacancy is a portrait of any living person. So there we are, John. Case closed. No, Peter's not in there. So the journalist, of course, goes on. I asked if she was writing from experience when Andrew, having done harm to his father, then seeks to make peace with him. To a degree, she said. If you've ever been there, if you've ever been in a difficult and complex family situation, you will understand. I suppose to an extent it's like Stockholm syndrome, isn't it? You have to make friends with the warders. This is a matter of survival. And Andrew, having dealt his father this body blow, then turns around and feels it's time to make an alliance. I think that's psychologically accurate. So her father remarried 2 years after Rowling's mother, Anne, died. But he did attend the wedding between Jo and Neil in 2001. I don't think he attended. In fact, I'm sure he didn't attend the wedding in Portugal. But they stopped speaking some 2 years after that wedding in 2003. And Rowling says, we've not had any communication for about 9 years, Rowling told me. She said that the break had already happened when, in December 2003, Peter Rowling offered his Harry Potter first editions for sale at Sotheby's. Some of them did not sell, but others did, including a copy of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, given to him on Father's Day 2000 and signed Lots of Love from Your Firstborn, with a drawing of a hand reaching for a running gnome. It went for $48,000. Now, why is Peter Rowling selling these first editions? Well, he had he'd retired at this point. So he and Janet, Rowling's stepmother, had moved from Tuts Hill and Yates respectively, and they'd got a flat in Swanage, which is a nice seaside resort in Dorset. And Peter had set up in business with his brother-in-law some sort of fast food burger van. Now, this went so disastrously wrong that he needed, as well as, I guess, losing all of his investment in the van, he needed £100,000 quickly. And that's the reason why he sold the first editions. Now, I'm going to make no judgment on, somebody with as rich as Croesus as Rowling was, why she felt it wasn't suitable for her to afford the money. But for whatever reason, he'd got this get-rich quick scheme, and it had fallen through the pan. And with that in mind, I'd like to read a bit, and this is from Casual Vacancy, and we are in the mind of Simon Price. Not a very nice place to be, but that's where we are. There was no choice but to work from 9 to 5 if you had a family. But Simon had always known that there were other, better ways, that a life of ease and plenty dangled over his head like a great bulging piñata, which he might smash open if only had a stick big enough and the knowledge of when to strike. Simon had the child's belief that the rest of the world exists as a staging for their personal drama, that destiny hung over him, casting clues and signs in his path, and he could not help feeling that he had vouchsafed a sign, a celestial wink. Supernatural tip-offs had accounted for several apparently quixotic decisions in Simon's past. Years previously, when still a lowly apprentice at the print works, with a mortgage he could barely afford and a newly pregnant wife, he had bet £100 on a well-favoured Grand National runner called Ruthie's Baby, which had fallen second to last. Shortly after they had bought Hilltop House, Simon had sunk £1,200, which Ruth had been hoping to use for curtains and carpets, into a timeshare scheme run by a flash, fiddling old acquaintance from Yarville. Simon's investment had vanished with the company director, but although he had raged and sworn and kicked his younger son halfway down the stairs for getting in the way, he had not contacted the police. He had known about certain irregularities in the way the company operated before he put his money in there, and he foresaw awkward questions. To me, that's a sketch of Peter Rowling.
Well, there's the name too.
Yeah. Simon Peter.
Yeah, that we see that again and again in Rowling's work. If the person's name is Peter or Simon,
yeah,
it's dad. It's the bad dad. He's confronted about this.
He is. So so I think off the back of Rowling saying, no, he's not my father, journalists from the Daily Mail then doorstepped Peter in Swanage. Most likely, it's possible that Peter contacted the journalists, but however, he was asked by a journalist how he reacted to being portrayed so nastily in the book, and Peter sort of brushes it off. He doesn't deny so much, but he does say, I'm not going to get angry about it. I'm not that kind of guy. Doesn't seem that convincing to me.
Well, it's a punishing portrayal.
Yeah.
I mean, you haven't talked about it, but Simon Price is physically violent. Punching.
Yeah.
His wife and his two sons. He's verbally and emotionally abusive. He's a chaotic force. around which everybody has to scramble to protect themselves and each other. It's a nightmare.
He is
Simon
one.
Price and his family's position there, and Andrew's, working a struggle, and Andrew's name, means the man.
Yeah.
That he's sort of the everyman child that's abused by a father, and Rowling said that on the one hand, there's nobody in this book it's a stand-in for somebody else, but I have known people.
Yeah.
Like every character in this book.
Yes. And
I mean,
she's certainly identified herself with Andrew, because she said that was me. I felt like this. I think we can identify other people in the book that represent different periods in her life. I mean, we if we had 6 hours, John, I still don't think we would have completely emptied all of the biographic parallels that are in this book.
I'm really astonished at your forbearance here. The parallels are punishing.
Yeah.
But
I think that all helps with the realism. I mean, even the monsters. I said I'm going to warn everyone. We're about to enter Simon's head. Even when you're inside the head of a monster, you believe you're in there. You believe this is a person. And I think a lot of that just comes from she's lived with people like this. She knows what this is like.
Yeah, well, Casual Vacancy. In my own life, you're 6 years before coming into this book. In my life, 2007 to 2000 and is it 2010 when the last Harry Potter movie comes out, or 2011?
No, 2010, I think. It was
so
9 and 10 for Deathly Hallows 1 and 2.
I was still very much, riding the wave of the Harry Potter mania, in that the films and the fact that they made 2 Deathly Hallows films, stretching it out even more. I was still being basically flown all points of the compass, giving talks at bookstores, churches, but mostly universities and colleges, to very large audiences of people that were very much consumed by the stories. 2010, of course, is when I broke the ring composition code at the group that shall not be named meeting at the Samsung Center, and that caused an explosion in Rowling studies. Suddenly we had to go back and really talk about the structure of the books and what that was about. So while she was plotting very carefully all the Corman Strike novels, while she was writing Christmas Pig, while she was putting together Casual Vacancy, I think from her notes for a private joke, that's not a popular opinion, and there's a lot of evidence against it. But it's one of those. Here's my argument for that. That well, maybe is it time for the shed, Nick? Is it time for me to try to redeem these books?
What have you found in this lake book in your shed?
Yeah, really. First, I want to say that you've talked about the key relationships, lake buoy or pillar, you call it, and probably the most important one. I hope we can go back to Bad Dad and just review bad dads throughout the work, because this is not a one-off. Bad dads are everywhere in Rowling's work. Simon Price is the most spot on, but it's everywhere inside that. I mean, Running Graves, bad dad is one of the worst bad dads in her entire oeuvre. Now that golden thread, if you will, comes from that key relationship. I want to talk about, the shed tool that I want to talk about is the traditional symbolism, and specifically the Christian symbolism. There's an embedded Christian parable in here, the Good Samaritan. But I want to go back to the lake thing here, because in 2012 I went into the lake and said, I was like that sign, in the lake next to you saying, "Don't go into the lake." Rowling, when she talked about the lake in the shed, she made a real careful point that there has to be a balance between the lake and the shed.
Yeah.
The lake has to give you good things, and then you really have to do your job inside the shed. And sometimes the inspiration can be kind of thin, so there's not much, substance there. And then she says that, she looks at those works and she says, there's way too much shed there. And I think in Casual Vacancy, if you were going to say too much lake, too much shed, you would say there's way too much lake. That this is Rowling's, at least psychologically, this is her first novel. But anyway, as I said, she told Charlie Rose, no one in this book has a living model, but at the same time, I have known people like everyone in this book. And you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to draw the dot-to-dot connections between almost every character and some experience we know of Rowling's life. Howard Mullinson and Simon Price, as you've detailed, are the abusive daddy who worked at the Rolls-Royce plant, and from whom Rowling has been estranged for years. Essentially, his marriage to his secretary, his relationship with the secretary very soon after Rowling's mother's death. Andrew Price is the young Jo Rowling, Paul, her younger sister, both of whom lived in fear of the violent man, and Ruth Price, the nurse, is the long-suffering, apologetic Rowling mom, who, as you've taught us before, is, went back to work in a scientific field, much as Ruth returns to nursing. Really, Ruth Price, though, comes off as an enabler. And if this is her picture of Anne Rowling, there's layers there that have never been explored. We've always talked about, Anne Vallant Rowling as sort of the martyr to the dad, but Ruth Price, not a flattering picture of the mother there, not unable to protect the children, apologetic to the father, protecting the father and stuff. Not a happy picture. Kay Bawden, the social worker, that's golden, because that's Jo Rowling, the young single Amnesty International idealist and magnet for men who are losers. And Kay Bawden is with Gavin Hughes. And I was just reading some of this stuff today, Nick, some comments she made to the Goodread organization, that Gavin Hughes, I think, is the closest thing we've seen in her fiction to Michael.
Well, we know that there's that parallel of somebody moving, thankfully at that point, not with a child, but moving across the country to be with someone who frankly isn't worthy of that attention.
That's right. I mean, and Michael, we talked about the 7 crises. It's 7 plus 1. We don't know about the Michael crisis. There's something that goes on there. Gaia Bowden, the London girl out of Step and Padsford, that's Jo Rowling, and moving to the Forest of Dean, do her father's stuff. Gavin can be the husband in Portugal too. He's probably a melange of all the cats that Rowling knew intimately. Stuart Fat Wall is the student Jo Rowling, consumed by French existentialism, hence all the authenticity comments, the hatred of hypocrisy. He's got everything but the eyeliner and boots of her Sex Pistols phase. Cubby and Tessa Wall, the front and back of Rowling in therapy before and during her great success as the Harry Potter author. Most notably in the shamming and the dealing with OCD and the self-induced guilt bordering on paranoia and delusion. There's probably a little bit of Joe Jessica in the Parmander Jolly kinship. There's Samantha and Miles Mollinson. Forgive me for assuming that the buxom Samantha, what is it? The over-the-shoulder boulder holders is her business. Is a poisonous self-portrait of Rowling's dark side embedded in the novel. She's married to a second-tier professional who is devoted to her and who she's ashamed to need and despise simultaneously. But she has a big epiphany and transformation at the story end in relation to her spouse and the community. Parminder is the social activist and spiritually accomplished wife, mother, and GP. But she's the wife of a doctor, right? A person who's relatively non-devotional or unconventional faith makes her an outsider to Anglican norms. I think that's JKR in the text.
Yeah.
Because of her activism, and especially that relationship with Barry Fairbrother is it's really a poisonous suggestion about her relationship with Gordon Brown. She became too involved with that, let's say. You can see Jo and Crystal Whedon as the girl she imagined she might have been in different circumstances, or who she was. Needs to be protecting the beloved younger sibling, Robbie, as well as swearing and fornicating casually and vacantly through adolescence. Whatever, I mean, you went with the bad dad, but you passed on a lot of material there in terms of the Rowling stuff. This book is Rowling. Every character, especially every woman, comes up as someplace. Now that's normal. You write about what you know, and she could write about what these characters were thinking because she thought those thoughts. I mean, that's anyway. We've been talking about our the back channel the moderator's back channel at Hogwarts Professor as and the theory there that really Casual Vacancy was the updated version of a private joke, the book she stopped writing to finish Harry Potter. I think that's right. We'll get corrected if that's wrong. In terms of the private joke, do we know the title of the book that she was writing when she decided to move on with Harry Potter?
There's a private joke was floating around, but there was also the 7 Cursed Diamonds, but I think that was given up long before.
Okay. Whew. I know the man I want to call about this, but I can't mention his name here. Anyway, the first novel syndrome is fairly well known among people that are Freudian, certainly. Robert Anderson, a psychiatrist who wrote Inside the Mind of Joseph Smith, explores Smith's Book of Mormon as an exercise in psychobiography. He's written the shortest explanation of the importance of an author's first composition. He writes this: it is a general truism that the first artistic creation of an artist or writer is usually most revealing of his personality, for it is hoped that the artist's work will also be psychotherapeutic work and contribute to resolving original conflicts and problems. Does that sound like what the lake and shed model thing? If the creative work of the artist or author is psychotherapeutic, or one hopes it will be and does sometimes seem to occur, then subsequent work will be more and more removed from the original struggles and conflicts. But it's going to be it's going to be sharpest in that first book. The creative artist may reveal aspects of his life throughout his works, but it is hoped that the artistic work will be therapeutic and maturational for the artist. When this is so, the first work of the artist is usually most revealing of his personality and the problems or conflicts most transparent. Okay? He writes that Smith's was the Book of Mormon was a fantasy compensation for his real life incompleteness and loss. Now, Rowling in 2012, her real life is an incompleteness and loss. But boy, it shows a lot of fantasy compensation, a lot of payback for stuff that she experienced before her success as the author of Harry Potter. This Anderson calls that kind of reversal in a psychobiography a fantasy conquest, in which the author is compensating for a horrible real-life experience by displacing it with a conquering fantasy. This is fantasy compensation for her real life incompleteness and loss. Now, this is not just psychobiographers that talk about that first work as the thing. I mean, Northrop Frye in Anatomy of Criticism, and you don't get much higher than that in terms of literary criticism, at least in my book. He writes that romance fiction is the nearest of all literary forms to the wish fulfillment dream, which is, of course, is what Freud and others have said is what all dreams are, is some form of wish fulfillment. And I think the reason I've theorized that Rowling is that Casual Vacancy was her first book was that in that first book she's addressing very, very powerfully the bad dad, the enabling mother, a mother-daughter relationship and a marriage with a doctor, a crisis of faith that we saw in Deathly Hallows. I mean, the Casual Vacancy in this book is clearly that of Christ in Pagford. You know, this there was a wonderful review in Christianity Today, of all places, about Casual Vacancy, in which a woman named Neff wrote this about Pagford and the Christian backdrop to this thing. Look at how Rowling uses religious themes. Chapter 1 introduces us to the pretty little town of Pagford, dominated by the dark skeleton of the ruined abbey, right? So old Christianity hangs over this town, but it doesn't play a part in the town. The expensive houses are located on Church Row. The church itself is mock Gothic. The townspeople, we will learn in later chapters, use the building for school plays and council meetings and parties. Another former church, Bell Chapel, has been turned into an addiction treatment center. The old vicarage is now owned by a Sikh family. Rowling seems to want us to know that the world of the Casual Vacancy is decidedly post-Christian. It is what Quaker theologian Elton Trueblood once termed a cut flower civilization. Pretty now, but rootless and doomed. And then Barry Fairbrother drops dead. This is again from Neff's review. If this book has a Christ figure, it is Fairbrother. He had not shared in the village's sins, though he was falsely accused. He reached out to loners, the mentally ill, the immigrants, the unattractive, even the troublemaking daughter of a notorious prostitute and addict. He was the living example, thinks one of the few likable characters, of what the council members proposed in theories. Did they not see, Parminder muses, what hopeless advocates they were compared to the man who had died? Even his name has Christian overtones. Fairest Lord Jesus, Jesus our brother, strong and good. He does not come back to life. Okay. What in Rowling's history caused the crisis of faith in Deathly Hallows and the attack on conventional UK Christianity and vacancy? It could be the Potter Panic and the criticism of Harry haters. I think it's something else. And, it's something that caused Rowling to realize she was way outside the bonds of anything like Orthodox or right-believing Christian faith. I don't mean capital O Orthodox, just, the views of the Anglican Church, let's say. Her views on abortion or prenatal infanticide and on same-sex relationships and fornication certainly put her outside those church walls. But her faith is clearly, as she says, very important to her. I think it's essential to understanding her work. It just permeates everything she writes, to include Casual Vacancy. Rowling chose to represent the Padford Anglican Church as empty and spiritually barren, while the two Sikh doctors and parents have an authentic and rich devotional life. The Sikh guru involved is one who rose from the dead after 3 days. Rowling herself told one reporter that Vacancy was all about how the light of God shines from every soul. And then she repeated that same thing in an interview with Charlie Rose. It has to be noted that Rowling's light of God message was not picked up as a rule by reviewers. The readers, we found the novel's gritty violence and depiction of desperate lives. One of them called it boring. Almost everybody thought it was vulgar. I think I've mentioned that she uses the word fuck 140 times. And every other word, almost every other page. We didn't find that spiritually enlightening or even edifying. But she told Charlie Rose in 2012 more about what she meant by the light of God. A Sikh hero is quoted in this book. As you know, there's a Sikh family. It's important. And the Sikh hero, he said, and it's just the most beautiful thing, and he treated foe and friend alike on the battlefield. But when he asked why he was giving aid to any wounded soldier, not just by his side, he replied, I can't differentiate between them. The light of God shines from every soul. Now that to me is the most beautiful, poetic way of expressing a common humanity. Whoa, okay. So one of her core beliefs is this light of God in every soul. And you know that from the text. the logos imagination or spiritual eye of the heart is, what her key characters are about. Now, Levon Neff, the writer of that review in Christianity Today, she mentions the Good Samaritan parable and how important it is. Levon Neff, in her review of Casual Vacancy at Christianity Today, at the end just touches on the Good Samaritan parable, but we'd already done that at Hogwarts Professor. Kelly Loomis had brought it up first. Then I asked a woman named a woman named B. Weissenen wrote up a full post about it at Hogwarts Professor, and then Rowling explained it in some detail without referencing the parable itself, the biblical parable, in a Q&A at Goodreads.com to promote the paperback, so it's about a year later. And she says, in the final analysis, this is Rowling, the Casual Vacancy was constructed so that when three characters walk past a small, unaccompanied boy who is wandering between a dangerous river and a road, we understand why none of them stopped to ask him why he was alone or take charge of him. And then she details, why Gavin, why Samantha, and why Shirley Mullinson walk right by the boy. And why she thinks, the fascinating thing is she thinks that Howard Mullinson, who's not a good guy in the book, would have stopped to help Rob because he had some sort of code. Now, I want to send links to all those pieces, as well as the stuff that we've written about, the Peter John linkage inside as a golden thread inside that. But my question is not if this parable is central to the novel. That's confirmed by readers and by the author. My question is why that parable? I think the answer is fairly obvious. Rowling's core beliefs are at their foundation Christian, and yet she has separated herself or feels herself pushed away from the community of believers, which is to say the body of Christ, because of her as closely held beliefs about sexual freedom or sexual perversity, however you want to look at that, and the murder of the unborn. She chooses constantly to make the other members of the Pagbird community the ones worshiping a savior guru who rose from the dead for 3 days, and the Christian, the worst sort of hypocrites. Barry Fairbrother, the Christ figure of the book, dies, and his beloved disciple, Crystal Whedon, which, forgive me, that's not especially opaque as a cryptonym. Christ all Whedon, is this person who's literally innocent, and yet because they're so completely other that people, the name means that they're urinated on, they're peed on. That person is raped, forced to prostitute herself in hopes of escape with her child brother, and dies despised by everyone except her Sikh admirer. Casual Vacancy is an agonizing cry from a disappointed and estranged believer in Christ, and a critique of the contemporary church in the United Kingdom. You can't miss this embedded thing. She chooses that parable because that parable is the gospel parable about the hypocrisy of the church. Now, there's other parables inside Casual Vacancy. It starts off with the barn keeper, that wants to build great things and do wonderful things, and he dies that night, and everything is taken from him. That's Barry Fairbrother. And just as powerful, there's the prodigal son in Cubby and Colin Watson. Their relationship, the adopted son, and his revelation at the end about his father and his father's rising to that thing. That's a very powerful picture of the prodigal son. And maybe a wish fulfillment thing about Rowling and her dad. I don't know, but it puts, that's another subject. But boy, the Rowling has said herself, that story aims at getting you to the Good Samaritan parable, where the Good Samaritan is the Sikh, the other that's not Christian, doing the Christian thing, and in selfless sacrificial love, diving into the river to save the younger brother of a friend who had betrayed her, she felt. that speaks to Rowling's pain in terms of her separation from the church, I think. But in 2012, I said, don't go there. Look at that sign in Nick's Lake. Don't go there, because that lake reading doesn't get you into the power. The story moved me profoundly, because in it I experienced the minds and hearts of husbands and wives, fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, in a way that forced me to painful reflection on the facts as they are in my current informative relationships. To look in the story mirror, at first unconsciously and then consciously. Was it a pleasant experience? No, I found it really, but was it rewarding? As much, I'd say, as it produced remorse and resolve to do better, which is not to say not respond as Cubby and the other cave dwellers do in this story. This is a different sort of experience and effect than the symbolist means and ends of high fantasy, though there's serious overlap in the literary delivery. I mean, there's a lot of alchemy in Casual Vacancy. I could have talked about that too, especially the Ouroboros scene inside the cave, the fornication on top of a dead body. I mean, these are powerful alchemical images that Rowling embeds inside this book. Realist novels, though, and just put aside the alchemical and the anagogical levels of this. Realist novels are a means to self-transcendence too, but they're much more of the psychic realm, the psychological reflection of the individual reader on his or her fallen self, than the spiritual experience of a greater reality, the personal conscience. If there is a greater reality than that logos imagination. If Rowling writes Casual Vacancy, as all authors write, especially as first authors write, to exercise their inner demons and psychological detritus, this does not mean this is the substance of the story. Unless readers cannot share in the edifying experience of that exorcism as human beings in relationship similar to Miss Rowling and her characters. So, I mean, I get the lake stuff. I hope I've demonstrated I really see the lake side to this book. But for me, the powerful thing is experiencing Rowling's crisis of faith inside this book. How Barry Fairbrother is the Christ, because that's the person that she wants all these people to be, and Crystal Wheaton is the people she wants everybody to take care of. That person that Christ really recognized as his everyman who wants to be transformed inside this book, and Crystal doesn't really rise from the dead. Excuse me. Crystal has a funeral, but it's a perfunctory rite inside that church that is really barren of personal faith, and the community doesn't turn on that as they used to do on the Abbey on the Hill. So it's a very powerful book. I think as the critical biography will demonstrate, it's going to be the touchstone work for all of Rowling studies going forward. I do want to say again, though, that it's Rowling's that light of John 1:9, the light of the world comes in every man. The light comes into the world in every man. That is that personal logos, that soul, the eye of the heart, the primary imagination of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. That's the power of this book, and that Rowling was trying to communicate. And in 2012, in her interviews, that's what she wanted to emphasize, not the painful family situations, not the painful relationship difficulties, not her personal history. She was going for that Sikh prophet or Sikh guru's message about our common humanity. Again, Tertullian, every soul is a Christian soul because of this logos light within us. Anyway, Casual Vacancy. What a wow! What's next, Nick?
So next is it's a first novel by an unknown author who retired from the military police and now works in private security. You won't have heard of him, a guy called Robert Galbraith, but apparently he's quite good.
Well, in fact, so good that the audiobook won an award.
It did. Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
it did.
And it got some raves from, famous mystery writers that Rowling admires. But there's a backstory there, isn't there, Nick?
There is. This isn't the lake inspiration. I'm not gonna. So my lake point for Cuckoo's Calling is I'm not going to reveal to the watchers who the real author was behind Cuckoo's Calling. I'm guessing that story's broken, but there is a mysterious dedication in Cuckoo's Calling to the real DB Mac. So I'm going to be talking about the real DB Mac.
Okay, I think I know this one. That's a shame, because I was really hoping you were going to go with the whole Robert Galbraith pseudonym thing and the series of lies that Rowling tells to guard that pseudonym.
I think we have to talk about that, don't we? When we lay the background for Cuckoo's Calling.
Good, because it's really there's this persistent thing that if you're an admirer of Rowling as an author, you have to believe everything she says about her work or about her life or about this and that. And wow, you really have to turn a blind eye to the historical record to not understand that this is an undependable narrator. Anyway, the shed illustration of this is, first of all, is to say that Cuckoo's Calling is not the first Cormoran Strike novel.
Sorry, just to interrupt, I'm going to put a tag in there. So I lost your video for about 5-10 seconds. Still got your voice, but your video went.
You probably saw me plug in. But why we went out suddenly, I don't know.
Okay.
But your video's back up.
Yes. Yeah. Do you want to try again from Shed?
Okay. So, I hope we're going to cover some of that lake material about Rowling being an undependable narrator. But the Shed element I really want to lean on is that this isn't the first book of the series, according to Rowling. Silkworm is the first book in the series, and she just switched them about. She suggests because she wanted Strike to have a reputation builder inside the first book. And I want to really put the marker down on that and say, no way is that the case. And I wanted to describe just the connections between book 1 and book 7, because I'm really pretty confident that the series was written as a 3-book ring cycle, a 7-book ring cycle with a 3-book epicycle, like an astrology or something. We don't know what that epicycle is going to look like, but we do know that the first 7 books of the series are a solid ring with a latch around Mrs. Hook. And I'm going to talk about that. We knew the Casual Vacancy was going to be epic, didn't we, Nick? So I guess that
we did. Thank you for that. I enjoyed that one. And goodbye, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.